Ever get that feeling?
Yeah.
Like you bought the latest thing, the thing everyone's talking about, and
Ah,
then
Oh, yeah.
it's a total letdown. It's like that. But for a whole decade, the roaring 20s,
Yeah.
jazz age, flappers. But under all that, a lot of change, a lot of anxiety. Kind of like now, huh?
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? This historian, Michael E. Parrish, in his book Anxious Decades, he really peels back the shiny surface. You see the anxiety, even with all the
We're
progress.
actually tapping into Professor Parrish's insights. He did an
ah,
interview on American History Tellers.
Yeah?
Really great stuff. We're using that to kind of steer our deep dive today.
Mhm.
So, okay, picture America. More people in cities now than out in the country, first time ever.
Whoa. Just think about that for a second. That's not just numbers, right? That's power shifting. Cities, they're the hubs now for everything, really.
So all those folks used to the small town life, they're feeling a bit lost.
Definitely. It's like their whole world is being turned upside down. Values, way of life, all of it. And this clash, it fed right into some of the biggest, most heated debates of the time.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Okay, so you've got prohibition, huge. Then the Scopes trial, can you teach evolution? And women, their roles are changing like crazy. All of this. It's a powder keg. People are trying to figure out, how do we hold on to our values when everything's changing so fast?
Professor Parrish really dove into how this affected women specifically. He talked about new roles, rights, but also backlash, right?
Absolutely. Like the Equal Rights Amendment, birth control, it all challenged the old ways. And then, of course, you have the flappers, short skirts, bob hair, the whole image. It's exciting for some, but for others, it's like the world's gone mad.
And yet, here we are today, still debating the same stuff
Hmm.
about women, about roles, equality. And speaking of things echoing through time, we can't forget celebrities.
Right. And think about it. This boom in celebrity, it happens right when radio and Hollywood explode. It's not a coincidence. You've got these new voices, new faces. On the radio, it's guys like Eddie Cantor, Jack Benny, sports, Red Grange, those boxing matches, Dempsey and Tunney, and of course, the movie stars.
Cronkite versus TikTok, right?
Yeah, kind of. And it wasn't just entertainment. These folks, they started shaping opinions, people listened. They were the original influencers long before social media.
So the 1920s show us how media can shake things up, right? Who has authority,
no.
how we get our information. It's all changing, and that's still shaping us today, for sure. But there's always a but, isn't there? All this roaring good time, the money, the fame. There was a dark side, too.
There always is, isn't there? It's like everyone was caught up in this get-rich-quick fever. War's over. Everyone's optimistic. Stocks are going crazy. Real estate. Everything seems unstoppable.
Yeah, I can see how that would be intoxicating.
And that's where Parrish really gets you thinking. He says all this excitement, it was masking some real problems. Like, look at the farmers. Prices were terrible. Global markets weren't as great as Wall Street made them seem. And certain industries, like coal, they were being left behind. New tech, new energy. It was a tough time.
It was all smoke and mirrors, huh?
Kind of, yeah. And then you have Charles Ponzi. His scheme, it was like the perfect example of this reckless need to get rich no matter what. He promised these insane returns, but it was all a house of cards.
It's crazy how some people fall for those scams.
It is, but Ponzi, he wasn't just a con man. He was a symptom of a bigger problem. This whole culture where taking risks, getting rich fast, it was the only thing that mattered.
Yeah.
Even when the warning signs were there.
It's a good reminder that even the good times can be built on shaky ground, huh?
Oh, absolutely. The 1920s teach us that booming economies don't always mean things are stable. And sometimes wanting to be rich can make you blind to the real problems. But before we get to the crash, the inevitable crash, we should look at how this played out globally.
Good point. Let's zoom out a bit.
Okay, so World War I ends. And America, they're kind of done with the world. Isolationism is the word. No League of Nations, tariffs going up, basically saying we're staying out of your mess.
So America's turning inward, focused on themselves and not really paying attention to what's brewing in Europe and other parts of the world.
You could say that, yeah. But Parrish, he has this interesting take. He says, okay, politically, yeah, isolationism. But American culture, it's exploding globally. Hollywood, jazz, even just stuff you buy at the store, it's all spreading American ideas, American ways of life everywhere.
So it's like, we don't want your politics, but hey, here's our music, our movies.
Exactly. And it makes you think, right, could that cultural influence have changed things, made America less isolationist? And what about today? We see the same thing, right? Countries pulling back, but their culture is everywhere thanks to the internet and all that.
It's a question we're going to have to unpack, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But first, another parallel we got to hit. The culture wars. They're not new, are they?
Oh no, the 1920s were a battleground. We talked prohibition, scopes, but that was just the start. Immigration, race, what it means to be American, everything was up for debate.
Just like today, social justice, identity, the role of government. I guess every generation has their version of these fights, huh? Trying to figure out who we are, what we believe.
Exactly. Parrish says it's not really about those specific issues, it's about deeper fears. Change, identity, those are scary things. And looking at the 1920s, well, maybe we can understand why we're fighting the same battles today.
So are we doomed to repeat this forever? Or can we learn and maybe, just maybe, bridge the gap? That's a question for part 2 of our deep dive. But first, a quick word from our sponsor.
It really is amazing how often these cultural battles come down to fear. Fear of the unknown. It's like things are changing too fast, and some folks just get left behind.
Yeah, it's that feeling when your kids use slang you don't get. Suddenly you're the old fogey, out of the loop.
Exactly. And in the 20s, technology was changing so fast. Then you have all these immigrants coming in, different customs, different beliefs, and new ideas about how society should work, challenging all those old traditions. It's no wonder people were clinging to what they knew.
But hold on, wasn't this also the jazz age? Flappers, speakeasies, so much creativity, new art, new music.
Oh, absolutely. That's what makes the era so interesting. It's tradition versus modern life, head to head, wanting things to stay the same, but also this pull towards something new. And you see it everywhere, those anxieties and aspirations, sometimes fighting, sometimes pushing each other forward.
You know, Professor Parrish actually suggested those anxieties might have even fueled the economic boom. Like people were trying to outrun their fears by chasing money and trends.
It's a really smart point. It's fascinating how our psychology and the economy are linked. When people don't know what the future holds, they look for comfort. Stuff, possessions, distractions.
Makes sense. It explains that get-rich-quick attitude we were talking about.
Yeah.
It wasn't just greed. It was about feeling in control when everything felt like it was spinning out of control.
Exactly. And this is where the parallels to today just jump out at you, don't they? I mean, think about it. We're constantly told we need to be successful, buy the latest gadgets, project this image of perfect happiness through all the stuff we buy. It's just like the 1920s. Material wealth, social status. It's all a way to cope with those deeper fears about who we are and where we fit in.
It's that whole keeping up with the Joneses thing, but now the Joneses are influencers on Instagram, and the finish line keeps moving.
And all that striving, it can make people feel empty, even if you have the money, the things,
Yeah.
because it's not really about that, is it? It's about belonging, having a purpose, feeling connected to something real in a world that can feel so fragmented.
So how do we break out of that cycle? Did Professor Parrish have any advice?
Well, he didn't offer any easy answers, and I don't think there are any, honestly, but he really stressed how important critical thinking is. Questioning those messages we're bombarded with constantly, finding meaning and purpose that goes deeper than just stuff.
It's like we need to look beyond the surface, figure out what really matters.
Exactly. And it's also about realizing we're not alone in these anxieties. They're not new. People have felt them throughout history. And by studying the past, maybe we can understand ourselves better, understand the challenges we're facing today.
Like holding up a mirror to history and seeing our own hopes and fears reflected back.
Great. And maybe by seeing those reflections, we can break free from those cycles of anxiety and dissatisfaction, learn from those who came before us, and hopefully find a better path forward.
Powerful stuff. It reminds us that history isn't just dates and dusty textbooks. It's about understanding what it means to be human.
Absolutely. And while we're on the topic of connections, remember that question about America's isolationist stance in the 1920s? Well, it wasn't just political. There was a lot of anti-immigrant feeling, too.
Yeah, a lot of fear directed at those new arrivals, especially from Southern and Eastern Europe, right?
Exactly. And a lot of it came from economics, honestly. Like we said, some Americans were struggling. And it was easy to blame the immigrants. They were seen as competition for jobs and resources and all their different customs and beliefs. It felt threatening to some people.
That's a story we hear a lot even today, isn't it? Immigrants and minorities often get blamed for economic problems or social issues.
It's a pretty common pattern, sadly. When times are tough, we tend to fear the other. And that fear can be really dangerous. People in power can exploit it to divide us, gain power by playing on our worst instincts.
It's a warning, something to be careful of, especially now.
Oh, absolutely. We have to be careful about those who try to use our anxieties against us. The only way through this is to remember we're all human, and we need to work together to make a fairer world for everyone.
Well said. So before we wrap up this deep dive into the Roaring Twenties, Let's go back to one of the biggest parallels we've seen. Celebrity culture, its impact, back then and now.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Fame is powerful stuff, and it shapes how we think, what we value.
Professor Parrish talked about how the 20s was when celebrities started becoming the big influencers, not those traditional authority figures.
Mhm.
And it's just gotten bigger since then with the internet and everything.
Definitely. Think about it. We're surrounded by images of celebrities, athletes, social media stars. They're always vying for our attention, pushing products, supporting causes. They tell us what's cool, what we should want, what matters. It's overwhelming.
It's like we've given them the power to decide what we believe. Sometimes it feels like we care more about what's trending on Twitter than what's happening in our own neighborhoods.
It's a valid concern. The 1920s show us what can happen when we put celebrities on a pedestal. We have to be careful about taking their messages at face value.
But there's good that can come from it too, right? I mean, some celebrities use their influence to shine a light on important issues, inspire change.
Absolutely. Lots of great examples of that. The key is being smart about it. Think critically about the message. Remember that even celebrities are just people. They have their own biases, their own agendas.
It's about separating the real from the fake.
Exactly. And recognizing that real influence comes from inside us, from our own values, our own beliefs. We can be inspired by others, sure, but ultimately we're the ones in charge of our lives, of making a difference in the world.
So much to think about. We've really uncovered these amazing connections between the Roaring '20s and today, huh? The economy, those cultural battles, how new media shapes everything, even celebrity culture.
Yeah, and you know what's really interesting? It's how those different things all connect, right? They're all part of this bigger story about change, identity.
Yeah.
Trying to find meaning in a world that keeps moving faster and faster.
But we got to be careful, right? We can't just say history's repeating itself exactly. It's never that simple.
Definitely not. We can't draw a straight line from back then to now. But history can help us understand, right? The things that make people tick, maybe see patterns that can help us deal with today's problems.
So let's talk about the big one, the elephant in the room, the Great Depression. Did we learn anything from the 1920s? Can we avoid another one? What did Professor Parrish say about that?
Well, he's cautiously hopeful, I'd say. He says, look, we understand economics way better now. Back then, it was all new. Now we know the government has a role to play, regulating markets, keeping things stable. It's not really debated anymore.
So we've got the tools now to prevent another crash.
Maybe. But Parrish is careful to point out, just having the tools isn't enough. You got to use them the right way, and you got to be decisive. And that takes, well, political will, which, can be hard to come by these days, especially with all the division and gridlock.
So it's not just about the money, it's about the politics too.
Oh.
Our leaders have to be willing to make hard choices. Put the country first, even if it costs them votes.
Exactly. And that's where Parrish sees some parallels that are a little worrying. He talked about how divided America is now, urban versus rural, the rise of populism, all those us versus them narratives. And people just don't trust institutions the way they used to.
It's like we're seeing some of the same cracks in society that led to all the chaos in the 1930s.
Yeah, kind of spooky, isn't it? But here's the thing, it's not inevitable. We can choose a different path. But do we have the will to do it? That's the question.
Yeah, what about us, the everyday folks? What can we do in these uncertain times? Can we actually make a difference, steer things towards a brighter future?
That's where Parrish's insights about anxiety and finding meaning really hit home. He thinks the key to getting through this is resilience. For each of us individually and as a society.
Resilience. Everyone's talking about it. But what's it really mean in this context?
Well, I think it means learning to roll with the punches, how to deal with uncertainty, and finding a purpose that's bigger than just chasing money or status.
It's about accepting that life's going to have its ups and downs, and we've got the strength to get through it.
Right. And it's also about community, connecting with other people, finding ways to be part of something bigger than just ourselves.
Because when we feel like we belong, like we've got support, we're not as scared. We're not as likely to turn on each other.
Exactly. And that's what's going to make the difference, I think. Whether we repeat the mistakes of the past or create a new path, it's not about knowing everything or being able to predict the future. It's about wisdom, courage, compassion. Those are the things that'll help us face whatever comes next.
So if we had to boil all this down to one takeaway for our listeners, what would it be? The big lesson from our deep dive.
Well, I'd say it's this. History can be a great teacher, but it doesn't control us. We can learn from it, make smart choices, and build a future that's better for everyone. More just, more equitable, a world where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Now that's an inspiring thought.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even when things feel uncertain, we're not powerless. We can make a difference.
And that, to me, is the heart of what the Roaring Twenties teaches us. Progress isn't guaranteed. Good times don't last forever. But the choices we make right now, they have the power to shape generations to come.
Well, I hope everyone listening found our deep dive into the Roaring Twenties insightful, maybe even a little inspiring. It's been a wild ride, exploring the past to understand where we are and where we might be headed.
And if you enjoyed this look at history and how it connects to our lives today, make sure to subscribe to the Deep Dive for more. We'll keep you thinking, keep you questioning, and keep exploring those threads that bind us together across time and experience. Until next time.